Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com, and in this tutorial we are going to be talking about the useState hook. So what the useState hook does is bring state to functional components. Alright, so to get started, the first thing we're going to do is import the useState hook. So we're just going to come up here, we're going to do a named import, and we're just going to say use useState. And this is going to be pulled out from the React package. So what is the useState hook? Well, the useState hook is just a function. So what we can do is call it, and the argument that we pass in is the initial state. So this could be a string, a number, array, an object. This is just the initial state. So for now, I'm just going to pass in Bob. And what I want to do is show you what this returns. So what I'm going to do is just print this out. Let's go ahead and save this. Now let's take a look at it in the browser. Okay, so let's just go ahead and hit F12. And you see that we get back an array. So at index 0, it is our actual state, the current state. You saw that we passed in Bob, so that's what we're getting back at index 0. And at index 1, we get a function that is used to update that state. All right, so now let's come back here and let's get rid of the print statement. And now what you're going to see is called array destructuring. So you really don't see this that much, but for this, they chose to use an array. So we're just going to say const. We're going to use these square brackets. And within this square bracket, we could basically have these variables that represent what we just saw. So the first one is going to be the current state, which is name. So right now, name is a variable that has the value of Bob. And next, we're going to have a variable for the update function. So by convention, you set this to set name. Okay, so you just use camel casing. First word is set, and then whatever you named this variable. All right, so to prove that name has the value of Bob, let us go ahead and show this. Let's save it, bring up the web page, and there you go. So we get an output of Bob. All right, so we have Bob printed out here. But let's say I want to update the state. So how do I go about using this function? So in order to demonstrate this, let's just create a button. And we'll pass an onClick. And we'll just call this update state. All right, so we haven't created this function yet. So let's go ahead and do that. And within this function, what we're going to do is call setName. Now, there is an important difference between setState, which we use with class-based components, and hooks. So with hooks, you do not need to pass in an object to update the state. So you don't have to say name and then do stuff like that. So that's only with this .setState. The argument that you pass to the update function is going to override the current state. So whatever I pass to this. So for example, let's do some toggling. So let's say that name, if name is equal to Bob, what I want to show is Peter. And if it isn't equal to Peter, we'll just return Bob. So either Peter or Bob is going to be used to update this name. So let us go ahead and save this, bring up this, and we forgot to add some text. So we'll just say update state, go ahead and save, bring this back up. And you can see that we have a little toggling going on. Now, this seems pretty simple, and it is. In many cases, people like using useState because of its simplicity, but there are a couple of rules that I should mention before I go any further. First rule is you pretty much have to use useState at the top of your function. So what does that mean? You can't use it within like an if statement. You can't use the useState within a class-based component. You can only use it within a functional. and you can't use the useState within other hooks. Now, we're only talking about the useState hook, so we don't have to worry about that. But pretty much, if you don't want to run into any trouble, declare useState at the top level. The next thing is you could have multiple useStates. So you could have as many as you want. So let's go ahead and make another one. We'll call this counter. We'll say that this is set counter. And let's go ahead and change this to 0. And next, what we can do is we could come up here and say set counter. And within here, we'll just say counter plus 1. All right, now let's go ahead and show this. So make a copy of that. Output the counter. So we'll go ahead and save this, bring it up in the browser, click update state, and you can see that this is working perfectly fine. All right, so now let's move on to everyone's favorite topic when talking about state. How do we go about updating an object, right? So we have a string, a number, and we see that we just pass a value and it updates. But how can we update an object? So let's come up here and we're going to create a person object. Let's name it set person. And here we're just going to pass in an object. So let's go ahead and give this guy a name and we'll call him Pablo. And he's going to have an age of 500. Okay, so now let's make a little output for him. So we'll just say person. And we'll say person.name. And we'll just do some string concatenation. Person.age. All right. So I saved this. Take a look at the web page. It says access set person before initialization. So what does that mean? Oh, it's because I called this set person instead of useState. All right. So we'll just say set state or useState. Sorry. Go ahead and save this. You see that person Pablo 500. Okay, so now let's go ahead and update this. So first we're going to call set person. And unlike this.setState, like we do in class components, there is no shallow merging, meaning I cannot say that I want to change the name and say, I don't know, Pablo, let's call him Rebecca. So I can't just pass this object here. This object is going to override this state. So what we're going to end up doing is lose the age property. So let's go ahead and save this. Take a look at it. We actually should get an error. So click that. Oh, we get an undefined. Okay, that's fine. But basically what's happening is we're losing our person.age. That's why we got an undefined there. Okay, so how can I update the state? So let's say that I want to change the name, but I want to keep the age. So how do I go about doing that? Well, one thing I can do is I can make a copy. So right now I have an empty object. We use the spread operator to copy all the properties from the person object into this new object. And then we just change the property of name. So now I can say Rebecca, right? That's what we wanted it. So now doing it this way, we preserve the age. So let's go ahead and save this and take a look to see. Click update state. And there you go. We got changed to Rebecca. Same thing can be said for arrays. So this time I'm going to copy this instead of trying to type out everything. We'll call this people. We'll say set people. And instead of an object, we'll pass an array. So now let's say that I want to output this list. So let's create an unordered list. So what we're going to do is map over this array. So we'll say people.map, and this is going to return a person. And we're just going to output that person. All right, so let's take a look at this. So far, so good. It's complaining that we don't have a unique key, but we can solve that by using an index. And that should fix that issue. But now let's say that I want to update this array. So what we can do is call set people. And likewise for our object example, we just can't say, pass an array and add some random thing to it. So the way we should do it is we need to make a copy of our current state. So what we could do is use the spread operator, copy all the people into our newly created array, and then we can add whoever we want. So I'll say Pablo. Let's go ahead and save this. And you see our original list, click update state, and you see that we get an update of Pablo. All right, so that is working with objects and arrays. All right, so the next topic is we should probably talk about how these functions that update the state are all async. So everyone's favorite example to give is a counter. And I'm just going to comment all this out. So let's get rid of this. We'll get rid of that. And let's go ahead and get rid of that. And all we're going to do to prove this is just invoke the set counter a bunch of times. All right, so now let us go ahead and save this. Take a look at the web page, and if I click update state, you can see that it only increments by 1. All right, so what's happening here? Well, like I said, these are all asynchronous calls. So counter is basically stuck at 0. So it's basically doing 0 plus 1, 0 plus 1, 0 plus 1, 0 plus 1, and then we end up with 1 being displayed. Now, one way to solve this is to use an updater function. So an updater function is basically going to guarantee that you're working with the latest state. So it ends up queuing these set counter calls. So what I can do is we could call this a state, and what we are going to return is state plus 1. So we'll get rid of all of these and make a bunch of copies. Let's go ahead and save it. Hit update state, and there you go. So now it is updating accordingly. So if your new state depends on the old state or the current state, as you would think about it, you would use the updater function. And now each of these set counters is guaranteed to get the current value of the state. And then you could just do whatever you want. So you see that it's working perfectly fine. So now let us talk about the last thing that I want to talk about in this video. And this is called lazy initial state. So the whole goal of lazy initial state is, let's say you have a very expensive computation that you need to do. So some math computation. So let's make a copy of this. We'll call this math, and we'll say set math. Okay, so you have this very expensive math operation, but you don't want to keep recalling it. So remember, as app component gets re-rendered, this is going to keep executing. So you don't want to perform an expensive operation over and over again. So one way to avoid that is to pass in a function. And this function is guaranteed to only be executed once. So what we can do is, let's go ahead and print this out. And we return the state. So we're not going to have an expensive operation. We're just going to have 1 plus 1. So let's go ahead and save this. And we can bring back the web page. And you can see that this only gets executed one time. So if I refresh this, you see being initialized one time. So this is called lazy initial state. So if you have something that's very resource intensive and you don't want this to be called multiple times, you just pass a function as a reference. Now, it's important that you don't invoke this function. So let's say we wrap this up and do an immediately invoked function, let's say. And I save this, bring back the web page, see being initialized, but if I click update state, you can see that it keeps getting called. So make sure you don't call it, you only pass a reference to a function. So I think I covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover within this tutorial. So I hope you guys learned something, and I hope to see you guys in the next tutorial.